perfect segue music to a poem by Hafiz, the rascal Persian poet who shared with us a golden compass. Forget every idea of right and wrong any classroom has ever taught you. Because an empty heart, a tormented mind, unkindness, jealousy, and fear are always the testimony you have been completely fooled. Turn your back on those who would imprison your wondrous spirit with deceit and lies. Come, join the honest company of the king's beggars, those gamblers, scoundrels, and divine clowns, and those astonishing fair courtesans who need divine love every night. Come join the courageous who have no choice but to bet their entire world that indeed, God is real. I will lead you into the circle of the beloved's cunning thieves, those playful royal rogues, the ones you can trust for true guidance, who can aid you in this blessed calamity of life. Hafiz, look at the perfect one. Look at the circle's center. He spins and whirls like a golden compass, beyond all that is rational, to show this dear world that everything in existence does point right to God. What a beautiful way to begin Palm Sunday. In Unity, we have the rich tradition of looking at everything metaphysically. We look at the Bible metaphysically, and when we are metaphysical, we bring that story into today's time. We bring it in to real time. Every asset, every aspect, every facet, every place in the story, every part of the story, every person in the story, every bit of the story comes alive in us when we look at it metaphysically. And metaphysically today, we're looking at Jerusalem, that holy city where Jesus rode in triumphantly on the back of a donkey with palm fronds and hosannas. He rode into, metaphysically, what we know is a spiritual consciousness of peace. Jerusalem means the spiritual consciousness of peace. Now, Jesus, he went a whole bunch of places throughout his ministry. He went to many, many places, but at one point, he heard the voice of God. He got that direction. He opened himself up to spiritual guidance. And this is what the book of Luke says. Jesus steadfastly set his face to Jerusalem. So when he received that divine guidance, he turned with determination and resolution and started to work his way directly to Jerusalem. Now, I don't know how the Spirit of God shows up for you. I don't know what kind of voice you hear or what kind of wiggle or what kind of whisper, because sometimes you just know. You just know. You don't need that other stuff. You just know that this is the right and perfect thing to do. You just know this is the right and perfect way to go. You just know it, but sometimes you get the little whisper of an idea, or sometimes you have that flutter of intuition or that impulse to move forward. Or sometimes you do hear the voice of God. Now, I've heard the voice of God not even a handful of times in my life, but the voice is big, and the voice is loud, and the voice is clear, and the voice is direct. You can, you should, you will. And then the one that I really argued a lot with, move. I'm like, no, I don't think so. You don't understand. I used to argue with God all the time, even when the voice was big and clear and direct. Today, not so much. Today, not so much. But that's what Jesus heard, and that's why he steadfastly set his face to Jerusalem. The second thing about the entry into Jerusalem is that Jesus was at the pinnacle of his career. He was coming in, when honor and glory. Just the week before, he had raised Lazarus from the dead. You know, not everybody knew how to do that in those days. It was a big deal. It was a really big deal to raise somebody from the dead. And many people who had witnessed him raising Lazarus from the dead were in Jerusalem talking. You ought to see this guy. He's really good. He has some great principles. And when you apply them to your life, you can raise yourself from the dead. So all of those people were there greeting him with hosannas and cheers and just this huge consciousness of love, saying, come in, I praise you, I appreciate you, I think you're pretty hot stuff, you did it. Well, there's a feeling of peace that comes from great accomplishment. Now, those of you who worked on the yard sale yesterday, you might be confusing that feeling of peace with exhaustion. But truly, when you think about it, you set out to get a black belt, or you set out to achieve any dream you've ever had. Yes, I did it comes with that buoyant experience of peace. The third thing about Jesus coming into Jerusalem is that it was a fulfillment of prophecy. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. 480 or so years before Jesus was even born, Zechariah wrote this in the Hebrew Scriptures. Jesus was fulfilling his destiny. He was fulfilling his holy purpose. So as we look at that Jesus, the I am consciousness, the divinity that was in him, the divinity, the same divinity that's in us, when we fulfill our holy purpose, well, it was prophesied. It's what we were supposed to do. It's what we were born to do. You find that moment when you're like, oh my goodness gracious, I was born to do this. That's what Jesus was riding in on. Now, Paula mentioned that I grew up in Unity. I started in Unity when I was 4 years old. And I knew stories from the Bible. I just didn't know them in order. And I knew stories from the Bible, and sometimes I just didn't know the whole story from the Bible. So I was astonished and amazed when I found out, yes, on Palm Sunday, Jesus went into Jerusalem. And then after spending the day there, he left. And I'm like, what's with that? What's with that? He goes into Jerusalem. Isn't that supposed to be the best? He's fulfilling his holy purpose. Isn't that supposed to be like the end? Well, that's part of the myth of arrival, really. He went into that spiritual consciousness, but then he went out. And at night, he would either go to Bethany or Bethphage, which metaphysically means grace. So he would go into Jerusalem in the day to do the work of peace, and at night, he would go back to Bethany or Bethphage, and he would be in that state of grace. So into peace and tranquility, creating harmony, and then back into restoration, regeneration, and redirection. Well, metaphysically, when you think about it, and this is the rest of the story, at least it was news to me, in the day, that's where our consciousness is active. That's where we make choices about taking action. But in the night, that's when we metaphysically go into the time of meditation. That's where we reconnect with the divine. That's when we recalibrate all those events that happen in the day and come back to God, come back into alignment. So he went, and we go into the world engaging in right action, and then we go into meditation to remember right thinking. And it's that righteousness, those two activities of righteousness that give us a 360-degree experience of our life. Another prophecy comes from Isaiah. It says, the fruit of that righteousness will be peace. Its effect will be quietness and confidence forever. So why don't we have peace in the world? I think sometimes it's because many people don't know how to find that peace within themselves. Many people, even when they have a glimpse of that peace, they're afraid. Do I have everything it takes? Do I have enough strength? Do I have enough wisdom? Should I read another book? Should I go to another workshop? Oh my goodness, what shall I do? Because it truly does begin in us. That 360 degrees of Jesus lives in us because the same divinity that lives in Jesus lives in us. Lives in us. I like to think of the analogy of the swimming pool. So here we are at the edge of the swimming pool, and we want to swim in that sea of tranquility. We want to swim and be fully immersed in that consciousness of peace. But first, we're going to write about it. We're going to write a few letters to some congressmen, and then we're going to hold a peace rally, and then we're going to send some donations out, and then we're going to tell 2 friends, and they're going to tell 2 friends, and we're going to just pace and think about how beautiful that sea of consciousness is, how beautiful that sea of tranquility is, and what we're really doing is pacing up and down the side of the pool. The only way to swim in the pool, in the sea of tranquility, in the sea of peace, is to jump in. Jump in. Jesus did it with all his heart and his soul. And quite frankly, every morning when we choose to get out of bed, we do it with all our heart and our soul. Charles Fillmore talks about how peace is personal, and it expands from that place inside us. He talks about that consciousness of peace growing inside us. And this is what Charles Fillmore says about spiritual growth. The increase of God in man. It's not get some and then grow it. It's already there, so it's increasing and expanding what's already here. All growth is first in the mind and depends on the standards we are holding. A high standard has a lifting power. There's a story about a woman who was born in Missouri. And here's a baby picture of this woman. Her birth name was Evelyn Merchant, and she was born in 1913. When she was 3 years old, her mother died. And by the time she was 12, she had been passed from relative to relative to relative, and finally ended up in foster care, which in her experience was not a positive one. And so when she graduated from high school, her dream, her whole memory, the whole memory of her life, her dream had been to go to Hollywood, California, and be in the movies. So immediately upon graduating from high school, off she went. Her stage name, well, she had a bunch of them, but most of them began with Jill, and there's a picture of her as her headshot for the movies. And then here's a picture of her in a movie with Buster Keaton. So she was in a few movies, and in 1940 she got married. And the agreement, I don't know if it was an agreement, but somehow she said yes, okay, with her husband was that she would put her career aside and stay home. So she gave up on her lifelong dreams of being a famous actress and got married. Now metaphysically, there's usually some part of us that says, oh yes, I remember when I gave up on that dream. And it never goes well when we give up on ourselves. After 4 years, they divorced, and Jill attempted suicide. In her long recovery, she discovered spiritual tools that changed her life and inspired her to write. She wrote mostly for magazines and authored children's stories. She wrote about love and faith and strength and wisdom, all the 12 powers that Charles Fillmore talks about as being our spiritual pattern of perfection. all of those 12 powers that are alive and active in us when we turn our attention to them. Through her writing, she began to engage in the inner and outer work of spiritual growth. She began through determination, a willingness to follow the guidance of spirit, to restore, regenerate, and redirect her attention to that high spiritual standard. In 1949, she remarried, and she turned her writing abilities to lyrics. Her new husband would write the music, and she would write the lyrics. And in 1955, they wrote a song about peace. Over the years, as the song spread around the globe, Jill was asked to give talks about the song and the power of each individual to help create peace. Jill was an inspiring speaker who believed that all of her varied experiences had contributed to her understanding. She was always ready to encourage people to keep searching for their meaning, their inspiration, their true beliefs, and to forgive themselves and others for mistakes made along the way. This song continues to lift the consciousness of the planet today. There she is with her husband, and there's the song. It's sung in every Unity church, I think, around the globe. It's sung in a bunch of other churches. It's sung in the United Nations. It's sung because peace begins here. It's sung because the balance of peace is the activity and the thinking, the right action and the right thinking that comes together. I have set off the fire alarm. It's hot. It's hot. Well, in that case, we better pray. We'll sing our way into meditation.